Act, RSO 1990, as amended, Chapter D17, the Court of Revision for the purpose of hearing appeals to the Cooling Municipal Drain 2020 is convened at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? Okay. Court of Revision is now in session. We have a motion for the acceptance of the agenda, moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gierzak. The Court of Revision accept the agenda for the Court of Revision on July 14th, 2020 as presented. All those in favor? Okay, it's carried. Approval of the minutes from almost a year ago, moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gierzak. The Court of Revision hereby approves the minutes from the sitting of the Court of Revision on August 13th, 2019 as presented. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Okay, so now we have a motion to receive a written appeal. Adam, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gierzak. The Court of Revision receives written appeals during this Court of Revision. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Okay, so now we have item 5.1, John Wilson, notice of appeal to Court of Revision. Yes, what do I do now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Peabody. I can advise that Mr. Wilson is attending. I can certainly invite him to speak if the court directs me to do so.
Okay. So, all right, very good. That would be appropriate. Ms. Hamilton, could you ask Mr. Wilson to address the Court of Revision, please?
Yes. Okay, we should just be okay. I see that he is now a panelist. I'll just, if we can maybe invite him to start his video. And Mr. Wilson, if you could unmute yourself, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, welcome, Mr. Wilson.
Good evening.
Okay, so we've read your appeal. So do you have anything to add to that for the court?
No, I had some questions for the engineer.
Okay. Okay. All right. So Mr. Nankerville, you ready to answer some questions? Or
Yes. Do you want me to answer questions now or after?
Well, perhaps you should do your slides then. And we can have the questions after the slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. I trust all of you have received the document that I provided to the court as to how the assessment was calculated for the property under appeal and our response to the appeal itself. I find it helpful for members of the court to have this information in front of them in the form of writing. It helps prevent everyone from just frantically scribbling down notes, trying to keep up with me and remembering numbers and percentages and that type of thing. So everything I'm about to say, it may not be verbatim, but all of the facts are in that written document for later on when you go into your deliberation. So as you know, we've received one written appeal for the Coolin Municipal Drain 2020, and it's from Mr. John Wilson, owner of Lot 11, Concession 14 in the town municipality of Brockton, roll number 3-118. First of all, I'd like to go through a few things, how Drainage Act is to be calculated, or how drainage assessment is to be calculated under the Drainage Act. The Drainage Act itself actually gives the engineer certain instructions and tools he can use in order to do that. So I'm going to quickly kind of go through this. The Drainage Act, actually, its purpose is to provide a mechanism for the construction, improvement, maintenance of drainage works. It enables non-riparian landowners to obtain a legal drainage outlet. It safeguards the rights of property of riparian landowners through which the drainage system may be constructed. It's a user pay system. All lands, roads within the watershed boundaries are liable for a portion of the costs. Section 21 of the Act says that the engineer is to distinguish assessments. Okay, and Section 21 actually reads, the engineer in the report shall assess for benefit, outlet liability, and injuring liability, and shall insert in an assessment schedule in separate columns the sums assessed for each opposite each parcel of land and road liable therefor. Assessment for benefit, Section 22 of the Drainage Act says lands, roads, buildings, utilities, and other structures that are increased in value or more easily maintained as a result of the construction, improvement, maintenance, or repair of a drainage works may be assessed for benefit. The Drainage Act also includes a definition for benefit under the Act, and it reads as this. Benefit means the advantages to any lands, roads, buildings, or other structures from the construction, improvement, repair, or maintenance of drainage works, such as will result in higher market value, which Mr. Wilson has claimed his doesn't, or increased crop production, improved appearance, better control of surface or subsurface water, or any other advantages relating to the betterment of lands, roads, buildings, and other structures. So that's pretty broad. Outlet liability, excuse me. Section 23(1), lands and roads that use the drainage works as an outlet for which, when the drainage works is constructed or improved, an improved outlet is provided, either directly or indirectly, through the medium of any other drainage works or of swale, ravine, creek, watercourse, may be assessed for outlet liability. The basis of assessment for outlet liability, Section 23(3), is the assessment for outlet liability and injuring liability provided for in subsections 1 and 2 shall be based upon the volume and rate of flow of the water artificially caused to flow upon the injured land or road or into the drainage works from the lands and roads liable for such assessments. Okay, so those are the two sections of the Act that we had to assess out these costs here. There are other sections, but only those two sections were applicable in this case. So now I'd like to go through and just explain to you how we come up with Mr. Wilson's assessment. And I'm going to start with Section 22, benefit assessment. And that's on page 8 of your document if you have them there. The total estimated construction costs for the works proposed on Mr. Wilson's property are $33,148. The allowances provided to that particular property, $4,980. Engineering and administration, $16,055 for a total cost of the work being proposed on that particular property being $54,183. So of that, we assessed that property a benefit of $12,800. That $12,800 is 23.6% of the cost that the watershed is making investing in that particular property. So 23.6%, just a little under 25. And the actual total cost of the work done on the property is actually 86.7% of the total cost. So almost all the work is done on Mr. Wilson's property. So that's the benefit portion that you see in the assessment schedule. The outlet liability, he has a total acreage in the watershed as shown on our drawings of 3.6 hectares or 9 acres. And that 3.6 hectares or 9 acres is agricultural lands, and we had it entering, the point of entry being the outlet structure at point at station 0.000. So that's not the pipe system. That's the outlet of the pipe system, where if Mr. Wilson was to systematically tile that farm, probably he would use that same outlet. Right now, the surface water uses that same outlet. The total cost of the, the outlet assessment has been calculated for that property at $647. The construction cost for the outlet structure, that's the drop structure, the riprap, and the brushing and mulching, that type of thing. That estimated cost is $6,728. The outlet assessment for his property represents 9.6% of the estimated construction costs of the outlet structure alone. So a little under 10% of that outlet structure, which his property will be using, was assessed directly to him in the form of outlet. So if we take a look at kind of the summary of assessments for the Mr. Wilson property, we have a benefit assessment of $12,800. We have the outlet assessment of $647 for total assessment of $13,477, which represents 21.6% of the total cost of the project has been assessed to that particular property. His property does qualify for the 1/3 provincial grant. So if we deduct the 1/3 provincial grant, and if we were to deduct the allowances provided for to that property under the report, he has a net assessment or out-of-pocket expenses, so to speak, of $3,985, just under $4,000. That $3,985 actually represents 6.4% of the total cost of the work as proposed here. We feel that we've been pretty reasonable with him. Now on page 11 of the document, I've paraphrased Mr. Wilson's appeal there. It's almost word for word, but not quite. And I think we've all read that before, and Mr. Wilson's very well familiar with it. If we go to page 12, I'm going to break out a couple of his key arguments or statements. The first one being that the proposed drain offers little benefit to my property based on the definition of benefit under the Drainage Act. I'm glad to see Mr. Wilson didn't say no benefit. Quite often we get that argument that their property has no benefit. But he says it's of little benefit. There are other examples of benefit included in the Drainage Act definition beyond what was included in the appeal, such as better control of surface or subsurface water across this property. And I don't really think that can be argued when we put this pipe system in and give it a good outlet into a water course. I think he definitely is getting better control of surface and subsurface water through his property. The second point he makes in his appeal is a large part of the current drainage system for the area depicted on the plan and profile drains into the outlet on concession 14. I believe I know the outlet he's talking about there. And if you are looking at our plan, drawing 1 of 2, it's right up by the buildings, and you can actually see a little bit of a swale or an open ditch heading towards concession 14. I believe that's what he's talking about. The watershed, as outlined on our plan, was established by field investigation and data analysis of the SWOOP data. And SWOOP means Southwestern Ontario Orthophotographic Project. It's available for free, and it's out there. They do it about every 5 years. They have been flying it. So we've used that to determine the watershed boundaries, and we believe the watershed boundaries in our report to be correct. And we haven't been provided any contrary information by Mr. Wilson. This is the best information we have. We think the watershed is correct. Now going to page 13, the report does not include allowance for loss of access and use to approximately 75% of the farm during construction. Allowances aren't a part of assessment. The proper venue to object to the allowances provided in the report would have been at the consideration of the report. The Court of Revision, as you're here today, you don't have any authority to make any adjustments to the allowances, just the distribution of the other costs. Having said that, I suspect there's maybe a little bit of a misunderstanding. Most contractors that would be awarded this type of job would install that 244 meters, I believe it is, 244 meters of tile. A lot of contractors would do that in a day. Some might take 2 days, but at no time would the farm be severed physically that Mr. Wilson or his renter didn't have access to the southern 75%. So I just wonder if that's a little bit of a misunderstanding, because that severance and loss of use that he's talking about during construction to the 75% to the south, that really won't happen. And I think that's about it for my presentation. At Dietrich Engineering, we do assessments on a regular basis. And here we like to have 3 opinions when we do this. There's 4 different people in the office that actually participate in this, and we each do our own thing. Then we kind of get together, compare notes. We try to be reasonable with everybody. I like to use the word reasonable better than fair. Fair indicates to me a right and a wrong. We think we've been reasonable with the assessment here to the property owned by Mr. John Wilson, but we'll leave that up to you. And now if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neckerville. Any questions from council, first of all? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Peabody. Through you to Mr. Wilson and perhaps to Mr. Nancyville as well. As I recall, this property has a fairly shallow well that provides the call it drinking water to the home and water to the barn. I don't know if that is still a working well, and I wonder if by putting in this tile drainage system or this drainage system, whether or not there's any anticipation that might lower the water table and render that well system no longer valid for water to the barn or the house. So John, any concern on your end in terms of impact to that well?
The underground stream, I know where it starts, I know where it ends, but I do not know the depth. And I don't know where the drainage system is going to be east of the road allowance.
But it is my understanding that the water comes sort of bubbling up very close to the laneway there between the house and the barn. Yes. And that's kind of where the water's drawn to go into the barn and into the house.
Well, the house is not occupied right now, so it's not being used.
Okay, so you don't anticipate at least that being an issue?
I can't answer that question because I don't know how deep the system ditching is going to be. I assume that it'll probably stop that underground stream.
Okay. And Mr. Nancyville, have you ever run into that situation before where a home and a barn are perhaps linked to a shallow well, and that by putting in a drainage system renders that well system ineffective?
I've heard of it. I think in my personal experience, I can only remember one time that I think one of our projects did that. That was quite a few years ago. I didn't know about the shallow well. I doubt if this one pipe from the Coolin property going across to an outlet is the source of that, but I don't have any proof of that one way or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Adams.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. And Greg, you've answered some of my questions. I went back through the report, the initial report, and it was $62,500 worth of work. And I wondered how much Mr. Wilson's property would be, and you've answered that with over 54,000 of the 62.5 is going into Mr. Wilson's property and costing Mr. Wilson $3,985 based on the report. Is there any maintenance cost, annual maintenance cost to Mr. Wilson? Is it one amount, the $3,985?
It's the one amount for the report and the construction. The maintenance would be assessed out using the maintenance schedule if there is any maintenance, which there really shouldn't be on this system for 50 to 100 years, shouldn't be.
Okay.
There is a 1-year maintenance that's actually the onus of the contractor too, in case there was something, you know, not done quite right at time of construction, that type of thing. But once we've been beyond that 1 year, then the maintenance schedule would take effect if there was any repairs need to be done on that. And that maintenance schedule is actually on page 10 of the report. And there you see that if there was costs incurred to maintain this, if there was some damage done to it or something, Mr. Wilson then would pay 13.2% of those costs.
At this point, though, you're not anticipating, you said like quite a number of years, you're not anticipating any maintenance, any ongoing maintenance cost for
Correct.
Mr. Wilson in this.
That's correct.
Okay. Couple other questions. Is there going to be, I'm not sure of the timing if this went ahead. And I know in the past with some drainage projects, we've had issues with crops in the ground and not being able to harvest the crops properly and so on. If this did go ahead, is there any concern in terms of what Mr. Wilson has in terms of crops and any loss in that crop?
We have provided for damages in this report, and we used, I believe, 4,000 per hectare, and that's for that 25-meter construction right-of-way. So that should cover any damage that are done to any crops within that corridor. And there's a 5-meter damage allowance for access to that corridor as well, provided.
Okay, so there is some compensation in there for that.
Yes.
Okay, the last two questions, and one's a more general one, Mr. Wilson mentions that he doesn't see any benefit in terms of higher market value for his property, increased production, and so on. Greg, I don't know if you have any comments relative to that. I mean, I think those, you know, if I'm in Mr. Wilson's situation, I'd probably be sensitive to that too, especially perhaps the drainage, affecting the market value of the property. I wonder if you could comment on that. And the second piece of the question is, what options do you see that this Court of Revision has relative to the endpoint of where we're at?
Okay. I think in the agricultural industry, most farmers and most real estate people would say that if you have a legal outlet on your property, it does increase the value of that property. And as far as to what options you have tonight, probably the easiest would be for you to look at that benefit portion, that 12.8. If anything was to be adjusted, that's the easiest. To adjust the outlet is actually, the engineer's been told how to do it. So unless we made a mistake in our entry points or factors of some kind, probably I wouldn't touch that one if I was the court. That 12.8, you could make some adjustments to that. And whatever you take off of, assuming you would certainly take off of that 12.8, you just have to reallocate that to one of the two other assessed properties, which is your unopened road allowance and Mr. Coolin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Greg.
Okay, Mr. Wilson.
Yes, I did not receive a copy of the second report that you're referring to, so I'm scrolling back and forth in the engineering report that I have. So now that the engineer has answered most of my question about the benefits, the only other question I have is, from my understanding, is the system drainage that he's referring to that might happen in the future that can only join the last 18 meters of the drainage system. Is that correct?
That's the only part, actually the last 10 meters in that outlet structure is the only part that you have been assessed into, yeah. Probably if you were to get a tile contractor in to systematically tile your farm, he would probably recommend running headers and to outlet those headers at the same outlet as this, rather than tap into it.
So I will have no access to the drain then.
You will have access to it, yeah. If your contractor come up with a different drainage scheme, you could use it. It's there, you're paying towards it. You have the right to use it. But
So
just if you were talking to a contractor, he's not gonna, oh, well, we wouldn't recommend him running every 40 feet and tapping into the municipal drain. Definitely not. And most contractors would not do that. They would put a header in and they would tap in. If they didn't go directly to the outlet, which I suspect they would, it would be down near that outlet anyway.
So that limits my options substantially then.
No, I don't think so. No, the lay of the land actually kind of wants to go that way. So a contractor wouldn't be trying to use an upper part of that tile drainage system. He'd want to use a lower part. Now, whether he wanted to go right to the outlet, I think most would. Maybe not. What if he wanted to go, say, 2/3 of the way downstream across your property? That might seem reasonable. If that's what he recommended and it was a licensed contractor, then you have the right to use it there. Yeah.
I see. And where is the collection box on the east end? You're talking about headers or collection boxes on the east end. Where is that going in? Because that's not on the drawing that I have.
The collection box. I'm not entirely sure.
There must. How is the connection made on the east end of the road allowance from the adjacent property?
It's just that it's the 350 millimeter diameter concrete going right through from a concrete catch basin on the property line between the unopened road allowance and Mr. Coolin. So there's a concrete basin there, okay? And then from there down across the road allowance is the 350 millimeter or 14-inch concrete tile, and it continues right on down through your property until we switch over to some high density polyethylene dual wall pipe and into that outlet structure.
Okay, that's not, yes, that wasn't on my drawing. I'm referring to a collection box and you're calling it
a catch basin.
Catch basin on the east side of my property.
Oh, we don't actually have one on the lot line between your property and the unopened road allowance.
So there's a collection box going there into that end of the drain somewhere. Where is that going?
The only catch basin or collection box is at the very top end, and it's the property line between the unopened road allowance and Mr. Coolin.
So the 2.1 hectares it's being drained, there's one 14-inch line going from there to the concrete tile?
It's all 14-inch tile, yeah. And there's one concrete structure on this now. Yeah. The unopened road allowance is worked right through. It's like no one would know it was there unless they did. So we didn't put a second catch basin just 20 meters or 66 feet away from it.
Yeah, I just wondered how the connection was going to be made at the east side.
Just concrete tile, butt joint, just right through. No special structure.
All the way up to the north side of the adjacent property then?
Yeah, I think I'd call it kind of the east side of the Coolin property, but I think I know what you're talking about. I think we're talking about the same thing.
Okay, so it's going to go all the way to the east side of the Coolin property then?
No, the west side of the Coolin property, as
Okay,
far, sorry. I
so
may have
only
read
the
that
two,
wrong.
only the 2.1 hectares is being drained.
The 2.1 hectares that's shaded in on the,
Yes,
no, that's going to be subsurfacely drained into that junction box, as well as the remaining 10.2 hectares, I believe it is, of the Coolin property.
okay, that wasn't clear on the way I read this either then. So I think you've answered most of my questions then.
Okay.
No further questions. I have two motions to read, so we'll deliberate. Moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gierzak, that the Court of Revision decline hearing verbal appeals during the Court of Revision. All those in favor? Moving on to the deliberation, moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gierzak, that the Court of Revision does hereby exit at 7 p.m. in order to deliberate the appeal brought forward by John Wilson. All those in favor? Okay, so Mr. Wilson, we're going to stay online there. We're going to go offline and deliberate, and then we will return. Okay. So I have a motion now to reconvene, moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gierzak, that the Court of Revision does hereby reconvene the Court of Revision meeting at 7:17. Okay, so the Court of Revision did deliberate and discuss the figures and benefits as presented and weighed the different questions that were asked. So I have a motion based on those deliberations, moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gierzak, that the Court of Revision for the Municipality of Brockton approves the Cooling Municipal Drain 2020 schedule of net assessment and drainage works as presented by Dietrich Engineering Limited in the report received by the Municipality of Brockton on March 26th, 2020. So the court is making a motion to uphold the original assessment. All those in favor? Okay, the motion is carried. Okay, we now have a motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gierzak. Court of Revision convened to consider the Cooling Municipal Drain 2020 does now adjourn at 7:18 p.m. All those in favor? Okay, the motion is carried. Okay, thank you very much. We will now move over to the council meeting.
Thank you. So we will end the meeting